Good evening. Page 187. They brought the fascists, they brought the fascists, was a cry heard not only in the Novi Jerusalem in the late summer and autumn of 1945. That's how it was on all the islands of the archipelago. Our arrival, that of the fascists, opened up the road to freedom for the non-political offenders. They had learned of their amnesty back on July 7th. Since that time, they had been photographed, and their release documents had been readied, and their accounts in the bookkeeping offices. First for 1 month, then in places for 2, and in some places for 3 months, the amnesty Ch6 had been languishing within the nauseating barbed wire boundaries. There was no one to replace them. There was no one to replace them. And we, newborn blind innocents that we were, in our cocked-up cells, had continued to hope all spring and summer for an amnesty, that Stalin would take pity on us, that he would take account of the victory, that having passed us over in the July amnesty, he would subsequently declare a second amnesty, a special amnesty for political prisoners. They used to report even one detail. This amnesty was already prepared. It was lying on Stalin's desk, and all that was left was for him to sign it, but he was off on vacation. The incorrigibles waited a genuine amnesty. The incorrigibles believed. But if we had been pardoned, then who would have gone down into the mines? Who would have gone into the forests with saws? Who would have fired the bricks and laid them in the walls? Stalin had managed to create a system under which it was manifested generosity of or mercy. It had manifested generosity or mercy. Pestilence, famine, desolation, and ruin would have immediately embraced the entire country. They brought the fascists, they brought the fascists. That they had always hated us, or at least disdained us, but now the non-political offenders looked upon us almost with love because we had come to take their places. And those same prisoners who had learned in German captivity that there is no nation more despised, more abandoned, more alien and unneeded than the Russian, now learned, leaping down from red cow cars and trucks onto the Russian earth, that even among this outcast people, they were the most benighted and grievous of all. Now, that is what that great Stalin amnesty turned out to be, one such as the world had never seen, where, indeed, had the world ever seen an amnesty which did not concern politicals. All those who had burglarized apartments, stolen the clothes off passers-by, raped girls, corrupted minors, given consumers short weight, played the hoodlum, disfigured the defenseless, been wantonly destructive in forests and waterways, committed bigamy, practiced blackmail and extortion, taken bribes, swindled and slandered, written false denunciations. But those particular people didn't actually even serve time at all. That's for the future. Peddled narcotics, pimped or forced women into prostitution, whose carelessness or ignorance had resulted in the loss of life, all went scot-free. And I have merely listed here the articles of the code covered by amnesty. This is not a mere flourish of eloquence. And then they want morality from the people. Amen. Half their terms were eliminated for embezzlers, forgers of documents and ration cards, speculators, and thieves of state property. Stalin still was touchy about the pockets of the state, but there was nothing so repugnant to the former frontline soldiers and POWs as the universal blanket pardon of deserters in of deserters in wartime. Every man who, out of cowardice, ran away from his unit, left the front, did not show up at the conscription post, hid for many years in a pit in a vegetable garden of his mother's home, in cellars, behind the stove, always at the mother's. The deserters, as a rule, did not trust their wives, who, for years, had not pronounced one word aloud, who had turned into hunched-up, hairy beasts, all of them, as long as they had been caught or had turned themselves in by the day of the amnesty, were proclaimed now unsullied, unjudged, equal Soviet citizens. And that is when the perspicacity of the old proverb was justified. Flight is not beautiful, but it is healthy. And those who trembled not, who did not play the crowd, who for their motherland took the enemy's blow and then paid for it with captivity, there could be no foreign forgiveness for them. That's how the Supreme Commander-in-Chief saw it. Was it that something in the deserters struck a chord in Stalin? Did he remember his own aversion to serving as rank-and-file soldier, his own pitiful service as a recruit in the winter of 1917? Or did he simply conclude that cowards represented no danger to his rule, and that only the bold were dangerous? After all, it might seem that it was not at all reasonable to amnesty deserters, even from Stalin's point of view. He himself had shown his people the surest and simplest way to save one's skin in any future war. And in another book, I've told a story of Dr. Zubov and his wife, an old woman in their house hid a wandering deserter, who later on turned them in for it. For this, the Zubov's husband and wife got sentences of a tenor, each under Article 58. The court determined their guilt lay not so much in hiding as not so much in hiding a deserter as in the absence of any self-serving motive for his concealment. He was not a relative of theirs, which meant that it amounted to anti-Soviet intent. Under the Stalinist amnesty, the deserter himself was liberated, without having served even 3 years. And he had already forgotten about the little episode of his life, but things went differently with the Zubovs. They each served out a full 10 years in camp, 4 in special camps, and another 4 years without any sentence in exile. They were released only because exile in general was done away with, nor were their convictions annulled either when they were released, not even after 16 years, not even 19 years. And after the events, and because of them, they could not return to their home near Moscow and were prevented from quietly living out their lives. Now that's what the rancorous, vengeful, unreasonable law fears, and what it does not fear. After the amnesty, they began to smear with the paintbrushes of the cultural and educational sections, and the internal archways and walls of the camps were decorated with mocking slogans. For the broadest amnesty, we shall respond to our dear party and government with doubled productivity. The ones amnestied were the habitual criminals and non-political offenders, and the ones to respond with double work productivity were the politicals. When in history has our government shone with a sense of humor? With our fascist arrival, daily releases began immediately in Novi Jerusalem. Just the day before, you had seen women in the camp compound looking disgraceful, dressed in tatters, using profanity and low. They had suddenly been transformed, cotton washed, smoothed down the hair, and put on dresses with polka dots and stripes. They'd each got a hold of heaven knows where and with jackets over their arms. They went modestly to the station. Seeing them on the train, would you ever guess that they knew how to swear like troopers? And there, leaving the gates, were thieves and half-breeds who imitate the real thieves. They didn't drop their impudent bearing even there. They clowned and minced and waved to those left behind and shouted, and their friends shouted back at them from the windows. The guards didn't interfere. The thieves are permitted everything. One thief, not without imagination, stood his suitcase on end, climbed up to the top of it lightly, and cocking his cap and tossing back the flaps of his jacket, copped off at a transit prison somewhere, or one at carts, played a farewell serenade to the camp on his mandolin, singing some sort of thieves' twaddle horse laughs. Those released still had a long walk on the path circling the camp and on through the field, and the folds of barbed wire did not shut us off from us the open view. That night those thieves would be strolling the boulevards of Moscow, and perhaps even in their first week they would make their jump, clean out an apartment. They'd take the clothes off your wife or sister or daughter in the streets. And as for you fascists, and Matronina was also a fascist, double your work productivity. Because of the amnesty, there was a shortage of manpower everywhere, and there were rearrangements. For a short time, I was switched from the clay pit to a plant section. There I could take a look at Matronina's mechanization. Everyone had it bad here. But the most surprising of all was the work of one young girl, a real genuine heroine of labor. Though not suitable for the newspaper, her place, her duty in the shop had no name, but one could have called it the upper distributor. Next to the conveyor belt, emerging from the press with cut, wet bricks, just mixed from clay and very heavy, stood two girls, one of them the lower distributor, and the other the server up. These did not have to bend down, but simply pivot, and not in a wide-angle turn either. But the upper distributor, who stood on a pedestal like a queen of the shop, had incessantly to bend down, pick up a wet brick, placed at her feet by the server up, and without crushing it, raise it to the level of her waist or even shoulders, and without changing the position of her feet, turn from the waist at 90-degree angle, sometimes to the right and sometimes to the left, depending on which receiving car was being loaded, and distribute the bricks on 5 wooden shelves, 12 on each. Her motion had no intermission, did not stop or change, and she moved at the speed of fast gymnastics. For the whole 8-hour shift, unless the press itself broke down, they kept on handing her half of all the bricks produced by the plant during the shift. Down below, the girl switched duties, and she had no replacement for the entire 8 hours. She ought to have grown dizzy in about 5 minutes of such work, from those swings of her head and the bending and twisting of her torso. During the first half of her shift, however, the girl kept her smile. She couldn't carry on a conversation because of the din of the press, and perhaps she liked being put up there on a pedestal like a beauty queen, where everyone could see her strong bare legs below her hitched-up skirt and the ballet-like elasticity of her waist. And for this work she got the highest ration in the camp, 10.5 ounces of bread, a total for the day of 30 ounces. And for her dinner, besides a common black cabbage soup, 3 staccanovite portions, 3 pitiful portions of thin semolina cereal made with water. They gave her so little that she inhaled the full contents of the pottery bowl in one swallow. We work for money, and you work for bread. No secret there. A grubby free mechanic who had come to fix the press had said to me, one-armed Punin from the Altai, and I rolled away the loaded cars. These cars were like high towers, unsteady because, thanks to the 10 shelves with 10 bricks each, their center of gravity was high up, wobbling and tottering like a bookcase overloaded with books, such as a car had to be pulled by an iron handle. Such a car had to be pulled by an iron handle along straight rails, then led up onto a supporting truck, halted there, and then this truck had to be pulled along another straight line past the drying chambers, brought to a stop at the one required. The car then had to be taken off the truck and pushed ahead of one in still another direction in the drying chamber. Each chamber was a long, narrow corridor along whose walls stretched 10 slots and 10 shelf supports. One had to push the car right to the back without letting it get out of line, and there release the lever, setting all 10 shelves with the bricks on the 10 supports, and release 10 pairs of iron grips, and immediately roll the empty car back out. The whole scheme, it seems, was German, out of the 19th century, and the car had a German name. But the German scheme provided not only for rails to support the car, but also for a floor laid beneath the pits to support the trucker. But for us, the floor planks were rotten, broken, and I used to stumble and fall through. In addition, there was probably supposed to be ventilation in all the chambers, but there wasn't any. And while I struggled away at my mistakes in stacking, I often got things crooked, shelves got stuck up, refused to set, and wet bricks tumbled down on my head. I gulped in carbon fumes as they burned my windpipe. Therefore, I was not very sorry to leave the plant when I was again driven out of the clay pit. There were not enough clay diggers, and they were being released too. They sent Boris Gamarov to the clay pit too, and so we began to work together. The work norm there was well known. During one shift, one worker was to dig, load up, and deliver 2 windlass 6 cars full of clay, 8 cubic yards. For 2 persons, the normal was 16. The norm. In dry weather, the 2 of us together could manage 6.5, but an autumn drizzle began for 1 day, 2, 3, without wind. It kept on getting neither heavier nor stopping, and it was not torrential, so no one was going to take responsibility for halting the outdoor work. It never rains in the canal was a famous GULag slogan, but in Novi Jerusalem, for some reason, they did not even give us padded jackets, and there in the red clay pit, beneath monotonous dribble, we wallowed and smeared up our old frontline overcoats, which by the end of the 3rd day had already absorbed a pail of water each. The camp also gave us no footwear, and we were rotting our last frontline boots in the wet clay. The first day we still joked. And don't you find Boris and Boris Tuzenbach would have envied us a good deal right now? After all, he dreamed of working in a brickyard. Do you remember? To work so hard that when he came home he would throw himself on his bed and instantly fall asleep. He evidently supposed that there would be a dryer for wet clothes, that there would be a cot and a hot meal consisting of 2 horses. But we rolled away a pair of cards, and angrily knocking our spades against the iron sides of the next car, the clay stuck to the shovels. This time I spoke with irritation. Just tell me, if you please, what devil made the sisters relentless, just sitting at home? No one forced them to go out on Sundays with young people and collect scrap. On Mondays, no one is required of them a précis of the Holy Scripture. No one forced them to teach for nothing. No one drove them out into the blocks to put into effect universal education. And after one more load, what empty chatter they all indulged in. To work, to work, to work. Well, go ahead and work. The hell with you. Who's stopping you? What a happy life it will be. So happy. So happy. And what will it be like? You should have been accompanied by police dogs into that happy life. You'd have learned. Boris was weaker than I. He could hardly wield his spade, which the thick clay made heavier and heavier, and he could hardly throw each shovelful up to the edge of the truck. Nonetheless, on the second day he tried to keep us up to the heights of Vladimir Soloviev. He had outdistanced me there too. How much of Soloviev he had already read, and I had not read even one line because of my bezel functions. He told me whatever he remembered, and I kept trying to remember it, but I really couldn't. I didn't have a head for it in that moment. No, how can one preserve one's life and at the same time arrive at the truth? And why is it necessary to be dropped into the depths of camp in order to understand one's own squalor? He said Vladimir Soloviev taught that one must greet death with gladness. Worse than here, it won't be. Quite true. We loaded as much as we could. Penalty ration. So it would be a penalty ration. The hell with you. We rode off the day and we wound our way to camp. But there was nothing joyful awaiting us there. 3 times a day, the same black, unsalted infusion of nettle leaves, and once a day a ladle of thin gruel, 1/3 of a liter, and the bread had already been sliced. They gave 15 1/4 ounces in the morning, and not a crumb more during the day or in the evening. And then we were lined up and rolling. We were lined up for roll call out in the rain, and once again we slept on bare bunks in wet clothes, muddied with clay, and we shivered because they weren't heating the barracks. And the next day that fine drizzle kept falling and falling. The clay pit had got drenched, and we were stuck in it. But good, no matter how much clay you took on your spade, and no matter how much you banged it on the side of the truck, the clay would not drop off. And each time we had to reach over and push the clay off with the spade into a car. And then we realized that we were merely doing extra work. We put aside the spades and began to simply gather up the squelching clay from under our feet and toss it into the car. Borya was coughing. There was still a fragment of German tank shell in his lungs. He was thin and yellow, and his nose, ears, and the bones on his face had grown deathly pointed. I looked at him closely, and I was not sure he would make it through a winter in camp. We still tried to divert our minds and conquer our situation with thought, but by then neither philosophy nor literature was there. Even our hands became heavy, like spades, hung down. Boris suggested, "No, to talk takes too much strength. Let's be silent and think to some purpose. For example, compose verses in our heads." Excuse me. And so we kept silent and scooped up the clay with our hands. The rain kept coming, yet they not only didn't take us out of the clay pit, but Matronina, brandishing the fiery sword of her gaze, her red hair was covered with a dark shawl, pointed out to the brigadier from the edge the different ends of the clay pit, and we understood they were not going to pull out the brigade an end of its shift at 2, but would keep in the clay pit until it fulfilled its norm. Only then would we get both lunch and dinner. In Moscow, the construction project was halted for lack of bricks, allegedly. But Matronina departed, and the rain thickened Light red puddles formed everywhere, and the clay, in the clay, and in our car too. The tops of our boots turned red, and our coats were covered with red spots. Our hands had grown numb from the cold clay, and by this time we couldn't even throw anything into the car. And then we left this futile occupation, climbed up higher to the grass, sat down there, bent our heads, and pulled the collars of our coats up over the back of our necks. From side to side, we looked like two reddish stones in the field. Somewhere, young men our age were studying at the Sorbonne or at Oxford, playing tennis during their ample hours of relaxation, arguing about the problems of the world in student cafes. They were already being published and were exhibiting their paintings. They were twisting and turning in ways of distorting the sufficiently original world around them in some new way. They railed against the classics for exhausting all the subjects and themes. They railed against their own governments and their own reactionaries who did not want to comprehend adopt the advanced experience of the Soviet Union. They recorded interviews through the microscopes of radio reporters, listening all the time to their own voices and coquettishly elucidating what they wished to say in their last or their first book. They judged everything in the world with self-assurance, but particularly the prosperity and higher justice of our country. Only at some point in their old age, in the course of compiling encyclopedias, would they notice with astonishment that they could not find any worthy Russian names for our letters, for all the letters out of the alphabet. The rain drummed on the back of our heads, and the chill crept up our wet backs. We looked about us. The half-loaded cars had been overturned. Everyone had left. There was no one in the entire clay pit, nor the entire field beyond the compound. Out in the gray curtain of the rain lay a hidden village, and even the roosters are hidden in the dry place. We too picked up our spades, so that no one would steal them. They were registered in our names, and dragging them behind us like heavy wheelbarrows, we went around Matronina's plant, beneath the shed where empty galleries wound all around the Hallman kilns that fired the bricks. There were drafts here, and it was cold, but it was also dry. We pushed ourselves down into the dust beneath the brick archway and sat there. Not far away from us, a big heap of coal was piled. Two Czechs were digging into it, eagerly seeking something there. When they found it, they tried it in their teeth. They put it in their sack, and then put it in their sack. Then they sat down themselves, and each ate a similar black-gray lump. What are you eating there, fellows? It's sea clay. The doctor doesn't forbid it. It doesn't do any good, but it doesn't do any harm either. And if you add a kilo of it a day to your rations, it's as if you had really eaten. Go on, look for some. There's a lot of it coming among the coal. And so it was right up to nightfall. The clay pit did not fulfill its work norm. Matronina gave orders that we should be left out all night, but the electricity went out everywhere, and the work compound had no lights, so they called everyone in to the gatehouse. They ordered us to link arms, and with beefed up convoy, to the barking of the dogs and to curses, they took us to the camp compound. Everything was black. We moved along without seeing where it was wet and where the earth was firm, kneading it all up in succession, losing our footing and jerking one another. And in the camp compound it was dark. Only a hellish glow came from beneath these burners, the burners for individual cooking, and in the mess hall, 2 kerosene lamps burned next to the serving window, and you could not read the slogan, nor see the double portion of the nettle gruel in the bowl, and you sucked it down with your lips by feel. And tomorrow would be the same, and every day, 6 cars of red clay, 3 scoops of black gruel, imprisoned 2 who seemed to have grown weak, but here it went much faster. There was already a ringing in the head, that pleasant weakness in which it is easier to give in than to fight back, kept coming closer. And in the barracks, total darkness. We lay there dressed in everything wet, on everything bare, and it seemed it was warmer not to take anything off, like a poultice. Open eyes looked at the black ceiling, at the black heavens. Good Lord, beneath the shells and the bombs, I begged you to preserve my life, and now I beg you, please send me death. Thank you for listening.